Sometime in the fall of 2017, a librarian at a small university in the American Midwest pulled a request slip and went looking for a book that hadn't been checked out in decades. The title was unusual. The author was unknown to her. And when she finally located the volume, thin, cloth-bound, its spine cracked with age, she found something that made her stop. The book had been requested 17 times in the past 2 weeks. That had never happened before. Not with this book, not in living memory. And when she looked into why, she found the same answer that millions of people were finding simultaneously on phones and laptops and shared posts across the internet. An answer that raised a question so strange, so specific, and so difficult to simply dismiss that it spread from person to person like a slow-burning fire. Someone had found an 1893 children's novel about a boy named Baron Trump, and the world was not prepared for what that book contained. The author's name was Ingersoll Lockwood, born in 1841, dead since 1918, and for nearly a full century, completely, utterly forgotten. So who was he? How does a man disappear so completely from the record that even his most unusual work sits untouched for generations, and then, without warning, resurface at the center of one of the strangest cultural moments the internet has ever produced? And what do his books actually say that made millions of people simultaneously feel like they were reading something that should not exist? Let's go back to the beginning. Ingersoll Lockwood grew up in Ossining, New York, in a household that valued education and social standing. He was sharp, ambitious, and restless in the way that certain intelligent people of his era often were. Men who could have succeeded at several things but struggled to commit to just one. He trained as a lawyer. He practiced briefly. Then, in his 30s, he was appointed as a United States consul to the Prussian city of Stettin, a minor diplomatic posting that, nonetheless, opened a door into European intellectual life that he never fully closed again. He came back from Europe with opinions, strong ones, about politics, about the direction of American democracy, about the dangerous romance the country was developing with wealth and spectacle and outsized personalities. The Gilded Age was in full swing. Robber barons were building estates that looked like castles. Newspapers were treating businessmen like royalty, and the gap between the powerful and everyone else was widening in ways that made certain observers deeply uneasy. Lockwood was one of those observers, and he wanted to write about it. The problem was that political essays didn't reach people the way stories did. So he made a calculated decision. He would write for children. He would use the conventions of adventure fiction, the young hero, the magical journey, the hidden world beneath the ordinary one, and layer his observations about American ambition and aristocratic excess into something that looked, on the surface, like a simple fantasy. What he produced was a pair of novels. The first, published in 1888, was titled Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulger. The second, published in 1893, was Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. They were followed a few years later by a short political novel called 1900, or The Last President. And that third title is where this story makes its sharpest turn. But we'll get there. The Baron Trump novels feature a young boy, a baron, who lives in a grand estate called Castle Trump. He is described as possessing wild, unruly energy, an unshakable belief in his own intelligence, and a personality so large it seems to fill whatever room he enters. He is wealthy. He is eccentric. He is, in Lockwood's own words, convinced that his destiny is extraordinary. His adventures take him into hidden underground civilizations, guided in part by a mysterious, wise figure referred to in the text simply as Dawn. And his journeys begin, in both novels, with a departure from Russia. When the books were first published, none of this caused any particular stir. The eccentric young nobleman was a well-worn literary archetype. Russia was an exotic and fashionable setting. Children's adventure books were full of clever, self-important young heroes. The name Trump was a real surname. The name Don was barely even a name, more a form of address, a title. There was nothing in 1888 that would have made any reader stop and stare. The books sold modestly, were reviewed politely, and then faded. Lockwood kept writing. He produced his political satire 1900, or The Last President, in 1896. It depicted a presidential election in which an outsider candidate, a man the establishment never expected to win, does exactly that. The story opens in New York. The reaction among the city's wealthy elite is immediate panic. The chaos begins specifically on Fifth Avenue. Nobody paid much attention. By the time Lockwood died in September 1918, he was, by most measures, a man who had not achieved what he set out to achieve. His satire had not shaken the Republic. His children's books had not endured. His name did not appear in the major literary histories of the period. He was, in every practical sense, forgotten before he was even in the ground. And then he stayed forgotten for 99 years. Here is where the story changes. Here is where the past collides with the present in a way that is genuinely difficult to categorize. In November 2016, Donald Trump was elected the 45th President of the United States. The reaction, the shock among the political establishment, the chaos in certain circles of New York society, the sense that something unprecedented had just happened was unlike anything most living Americans had witnessed. And somewhere in the weeks that followed, someone went looking through digital archives of 19th century literature and found a children's book with a name on the cover that made them look twice. Baron Trump. The post spread almost instantly. Within hours, thousands of people were reading it. Within days, it was everywhere. News sites, social media, podcasts, television segments. Within weeks, original copies of the Lockwood novels were listed on eBay for hundreds of dollars, and first editions that had been gathering dust in library collections for decades were suddenly being requested by people who had never set foot in an archive in their lives. The coincidences people pointed to were specific enough to make even skeptical observers pause. Baron Trump, Castle Trump, a golden-haired protagonist of towering ego and relentless ambition. A journey beginning in Russia. A mentor figure named Don, and Donald Trump's first name, of course, is Donald. A boy who is convinced, against all evidence to the contrary, that he alone understands the world better than anyone around him. Donald Trump has a son named Baron, one letter different. He built his career around the word Trump as a symbol of luxury and power. His primary residence was Trump Tower in Manhattan, a glass tower that Lockwood's aristocratic, castle-dwelling protagonist would have felt entirely at home in. And then there is the third book, the political one. 1900, or The Last President. A populist outsider wins a presidential election. The wealthy neighborhoods of New York descend into shock and anger. The story opens on Fifth Avenue, the same street where Trump Tower stands today. One of the fictional cabinet members in Lockwood's imagined administration bears the surname Pence. The vice president who served alongside Donald Trump for 4 years was named Mike Pence. Now, here is the moment where you have to make a choice about what you believe. Every single one of these details can be explained individually. Trump was always a real surname, common enough in communities with German heritage. Fifth Avenue was already the symbolic address of New York wealth in the 1890s. Placing a powerful figure there required no foresight. Pence is a real surname that existed throughout American history long before Mike Pence was born. And the archetype of the brash, wealthy, self-mythologizing American man was not invented by Donald Trump. It was everywhere in the Gilded Age, which is precisely what Lockwood was satirizing. A reasonable person can look at all of it and say, this is apophenia. This is pattern recognition running ahead of reason. This is what happens when millions of people go looking for connections with the specific intention of finding them. And that reasonable person might be entirely right. But here is what that explanation doesn't fully account for. It doesn't account for the accumulation. It doesn't account for the fact that the coincidences are not vague. They are specific, named, detailed. It doesn't account for why this particular forgotten author produced this particular cluster of details that map, however imperfectly, onto this particular moment in American history. And it doesn't account for something that was noticed by a handful of researchers in the months after the books went viral. When new reprints of the Lockwood novels began appearing almost immediately after the story broke, and they appeared very quickly, faster than publishing timelines usually allow, researchers who had access to original editions noted what appeared to be subtle discrepancies in certain passages. Not dramatic alterations, not wholesale rewrites, small changes, shifts in phrasing, details that appeared slightly differently in the reprints than in the originals. Why would anyone alter the text of a 19th century children's book? That question was raised, briefly examined, and then largely swallowed by the noise of the news cycle. It has never been answered. What we are left with, then, is something that resists a clean conclusion. Ingersoll Lockwood was a real man with a real life and real frustrations. He wrote real books that said real things. He was not, by the evidence of his biography, a mystic or a prophet. He was a sharp, somewhat bitter observer of American life who used fiction to say what he couldn't easily say in polite society. The archetype he built, the entitled, castle-dwelling, golden-haired boy with grand ambitions and a Russian connection, was a product of his time, drawn from the culture he saw around him. The fact that it maps so precisely onto a specific man born 60 years after his death is either an extraordinary coincidence, a testament to how little American ambition actually changes across generations, or something else entirely. Something that sits in the gap between what we can prove and what we cannot quite dismiss. Ingersoll Lockwood wanted to be remembered. He failed at it in every conventional way. And then, a century after his death, the internet gave him exactly what he wanted, and gave it to him for reasons he never could have predicted, in a world he never could have imagined. Maybe that's the strangest coincidence of all. So, I want to know what you think. You've heard the details, you know the names, the dates, the arguments on both sides. Do you believe Lockwood stumbled onto something real? Do you think this is simply what happens when a vast, hungry internet goes looking for meaning in old books? Or is there a third possibility? One that neither the believers nor the debunkers have quite managed to name? Leave it in the comments. Because on this one, I don't think any of us have the full answer yet.